Okay, welcome everybody. I'd like to gavel in the Thursday, May 23rd, 2024 session of the Lake Forest Park City Council regular meeting. And I've asked Councilmember Lebo to lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
It's a good course.
Okay, so the next thing on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. So I will hear a motion to.
So moved.
You?
Second.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Any comments? Changes? All right, all those in favor of adopting the agenda for tonight, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, all those opposed or abstaining? All right, thank you. Okay, so now we move on to public comments. And let me read off the statement that we always read in front of the public comments. Thank you, Chief, for bringing the list over. Appreciate it. Thank you. All right, the council will not be accepting online public comments. This portion of the agenda is set aside for the public to address the council on agenda items or any other topic the council might have purview or control over. If the comments are of a nature that the council does not have influence or control over, then the mayor or presider may request the speaker to suspend their comments. The council may direct staff to follow up on items brought up by the public. Comments are limited to a 3-minute time limit. And with that, Nigel Kiefer. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Nigel Kiefer. I'm a constituent. I'll be quick about this. Everyone loves parks, especially waterfront parks. But at what cost and abusive process? Why has the public, taxpayers, been excluded from the acquisition process in violation of the OPMA, Open Public Meetings Act? Where is this transparency in our local government? Over 20 years ago, the city acquired the Morris property at 17337 Beach Drive Northeast for a public waterfront park. Purchase price was $985,000. The council approved the acquisition on June 25, 1998. After the fact, on August 12, 1998, the residents of Beach Drive Northeast by petition rejected such public use of the property. A signatory to the petition was Tom French, our current mayor. The property is not now called a public park, but a nature preserve with significant use restrictions. The then mayor, David Hutchison, bragged in the October town crier when the city council decided to purchase the Morris property next to the Civic Club. Was it doing so without consulting the public? Yes, he said. More recently, the city has acquired the new waterfront park next to the Morris property. The purchase cost was approximately $5,953,403. Like the Morris property, the public has been excluded from the deliberations that involved a proxy purchaser with extensive collaboration with King County and the state of Washington for grant monies. The city is currently concealing the development costs and the funding source. This city has a long history of abusing the public trust. These violations of the OPMA need to cease. Therefore, I have provided the city a copy of my draft legal action complaint for your contemplation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kiefer. Okay, next on our list. And I apologize if I pronounced your name incorrectly. Carly Ann Calbero.
Hello, my name is Carly Calbero, and I'm a student at North Seattle College, and I'm also a business owner. I've been a musician for about like 15 years. I'm here to talk about the salmon and the impact of tire dust on salmon in Lion and Macalaire Creeks in Lake Forest Park. While car engines are moving toward electric, the tires still generate dust and loose pellets or marbles. On a racetrack, that compound like builds up on the track. And it's just waiting to be swept away, or blown away or picked up by another car. Our roads see a lot more traffic than a racetrack, and while the chemical compound 6-PPD is used to stabilize and slow down the degradation of our commercial tires, it does not eliminate it. These rubber marbles end up in our roadway, waiting to be swept, washed, or blown away. And unfortunately, scientists have linked tire dust and the accompanying 6-PPD quinone chemical to be a contributor to the deaths of some of the coho salmon population as they return to the Puget Sound region to lay their eggs. Since salmon is an important part of our economy, ecosystem, and the health and culture of our indigenous communities, I think that it is vital that we put into place an infrastructure dedicated to monitoring the levels of tire dust and 6-PPD quinone in our waterways. The Climate Action Plan, I think, is like a very good start for that, and I know that you guys are taking a look at that as well. Even one person overseeing this task can bring continuity and clear communication between local government, nonprofits, and academics so that the full weight of each entity is being used to its fullest. While we have relied on cleanup programs, including working with local elementary schools and volunteers, I do believe that it is important to build a foundation where data can be officially collected, sorted, and distributed. There has already been some success with these programs, including a positive result in filtration using rain gardens. Not only does this help to beautify our roadways, but it can be used to protect our waterways as well. Placing someone in charge of implementing successful interventions like this and delegating the community of eager citizens is a step in the right direction. Tires are obviously here to stay, even if we move to electric, and they will largely be part of our society, even as the major car companies begin to switch. In the meantime, we have the means to begin to monitor and diminish the overall change. So I appreciate what you guys are trying to do, and especially with the Climate Action Plan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Calbero. Appreciate it. Okay, next on the list, we have Heather Price. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Heather Price. I'm a faculty member at North Seattle College, and I wanted to give you a heads up that you will probably be closer. Oh, that's way too close. You'll probably be seeing some of my students, like Carly here, speaking and sharing what they're learning about the science of climate and 6-PPD quinone, the tire dust, and also heat on Lion Creek and McAllister Creek. And so I just wanted to give you a heads up that, and also give you kudos for the Climate Action Plan. Very excited about seeing movement in our state when there's not a lot of movement happening in other parts of our state and other parts of our country. So thank you for the work that you're doing. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Price. Okay, so that's the list of people who signed up. Are there any other members of the audience who want to make a public comment? Okay, with that, I guess I will close public comment. Thank you all. All right, so I think we're going to move on then to proclamations. But before I do that, I'll take the I'll explain what's happening. The mayor is ill, and Councilmember Bodie, Vice Mayor Bodie, is basically on Zoom. So I've been asked to fill in to preside over this particular meeting, which is why I'm here. So I've asked, let's see, in order. Councilmember Good, I've asked to do the proclamation recognizing June 7th, 2024 as National Gun Violence Awareness Day.
Okay, here we go. Whereas every day more than 120 Americans are killed by gun violence and more than 200 are shot and wounded, with an average of more than 17,000 gun homicides every year. And whereas Americans are 26 times more likely to die by gun homicide than people in other high-income countries. And whereas Washington State averages 853 gun deaths every year with a rate of 12.4 deaths per 100,000 people, a crisis that costs the state $11.9 billion each year, of which $171.7 million is paid by taxpayers. Washington State has the 40th highest rate of gun deaths in the US. And whereas cities across the nation, including Lake Forest Park, are working to end the senseless violence with evidence-based solutions. And whereas support for the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens goes hand in hand with keeping guns away from people with dangerous histories. And whereas in January 2013, Hadia Pendleton was tragically shot and killed at age 15. And on the first Friday in June, people in the United States will recognize National Gun Violence Awareness Day and wear orange in tribute to her and other victims of gun violence and the loved ones of those victims. And whereas a group of Hadia's friends asked their classmates to commemorate her life by wearing orange, they chose this color because hunters wear orange to announce themselves to other hunters when out in the woods. And orange is a color that symbolizes the value of human life. And whereas anyone can join Hadia's friends in this campaign by pledging to wear orange on the first Friday of June each year to help raise awareness about gun violence and honor the lives of victims and survivors. And whereas we renew our commitment to reduce gun violence and pledge to do all we can to keep firearms out of the hands of people who should not have access to them and encourage responsible gun ownership to help keep our families and communities safe. Now, therefore, the mayor and city council of the city of Lake Forest Park do hereby proclaim June 7th, 2024 as National Gun Violence Awareness Day, signed this 23rd day of May, 2024 by Tracy Furutani, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Good. Okay. We have one more proclamation. I've asked Councilmember Goldman to read the proclamation recognizing June 2024 as Pride Month.
Thanks, delighted to. Whereas the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer plus LGBTQ plus communities of the greater Puget Sound are an integral part of the vibrant culture and climate of our area. And whereas the diverse LGBTQ plus communities continue to contribute to our widespread academic, economic, artistic, and social spheres within and around our city. And whereas the month of June was designated Pride Month to commemorate the Stonewall riots, which occurred in June 1969 and are generally recognized as the catalyst of the LGBTQ plus rights movement. And whereas the LGBTQ plus communities of Puget Sound have thoughtfully organized numerous workshops, sporting events, receptions, festivals, concerts, plays, dances, and a host of other inspired activities to participate in during the celebration of Pride Month. And whereas the city of Lake Forest Park remains committed to protecting the civil rights of LGBTQ plus communities, as the power and purpose of this iconic event proves vital in our unified effort to forge a more open and just society. And whereas the active and involved LGBTQ plus people and families make an indelible impact upon the quality of life in the Puget Sound, and Pride Month serves as a call to our collective consciousness to persist in the fight to eradicate prejudice and discrimination everywhere. Now, therefore, the mayor and city council of the city of Lake Forest Park proclaim June 2024 to be Pride Month in Lake Forest Park and encourage all citizens to recognize the enduring efforts and ongoing contributions of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer plus communities to our city and to our country. Signed this 23rd day of May, 2024.
Thank you so much, Councilmember. All right, so I think we're going to move on to presentations then, and I want to recognize Chair Sarah Phillips of the Climate Action Committee. And do we have the computer?
Matt, do I have the clicker? What a pleasure it is, actually, I have to say, to present this report to you. I printed mine out. I'm sure that's not appropriate for the Climate Action Committee, but I wanted something to hold in my hand. It's just, and my name's Sarah Phillips, and I am the chair. These are members of the Climate Action Committee: Mimi Bertram, Dana Campbell, Jessica Cote, and Ann Udaloy. We have other members here who are traveling and elsewhere. But it's really been a pleasure to work on this committee. It's a fabulous committee, and those of you who made recommendations for people to be on this committee, I wanted to thank you because you did good. Thank you. This is the big book. You think high tech, right? The city of Lake Forest Park has made a commitment to the reduction of carbon emissions. In 2019, the city council passed a resolution committing themselves to reduce emissions from a 2007 baseline by 30% by 2030 and 95% by 2050. It was part of the Joining the King Conservation District, King County Cities Conservation something. And that commitment to reduce what we think this report is a roadmap to how you get to those reductions. And I wanted to introduce you to our still unnamed mascot. We've held a couple of public meetings. This is a kokanee, and he may look familiar to you if you have been on near Animal Acres Park. It's the same young artist who did both of those designs for us. He did these for us, and we think he should have a name, but we haven't figured out what it is yet and how to get it. But that'll be the easiest thing, right? Well, this is our current mascot. I did want to introduce you to what we thought was our previous mascot, which was the Hares on Fire. And we thought that probably all the research says it's not good to frighten people, so we went with the kokanee. But there is a certain amount of urgency in this issue. I don't know if you read the paper this week. Monkeys falling out of trees, howling monkeys falling out of trees in Mexico. That was on Wednesday. I've learned this term, clear air turbulence, where the airplanes just sort of drop. Apparently, and that's that's a result of the planet heating and air circulating up. You know, Kansas last week was had the dirtiest air on the planet. Kansas, from the wildfires. Houston and Iowa. Houston was pouring rain, and devastating rains and tornadoes. These are all the kinds of things that are happening to us because of the impact of climate change. And they're happening locally too. These are not things that are outside of our purview. But and the impacts of the climate change we have begun to call them complex and cascading. And it's the garden ladies. I'm one of the garden ladies. You know, when the bugs don't come, when the trees come early, the pollinators that are associated with the flowering trees don't arrive, and then the birds don't eat the bugs, and it's sort of all of those things are happening in our gardens. The soils are changing, what people can grow. I just took a tour of somebody's garden, and they were showing me, it was like a bunny farm, but what was being eaten and what had survived in the past and what didn't survive. So, you know, they're here for us. We know it goes without saying, right? Smoke, right? We all know about smoke. And it was, and people are complaining about bugs and mosquitoes. I'm sure your constituents, well, because I'm one of them, are complaining about all these things. But what we know about them is that they're local, they're statewide, they're global. One of the things that we learned from our citizens is that our community cares about climate change. We did a survey, and we did it as broad as we could possibly. We got about 450 people responding to it, and it was a huge, you know, the dark green line are Lake Forest Park's response, and the light green line are from a Yale survey. And so combined together, they're about the same, very concerned and somewhat concerned. And you know that they're concerned too, because we have young people who've decided not to have children because they don't see a future. We've got elderly people who are, you know, spend the summer inside. And more people are talking about climate becoming a mental health issue. So the document that we created for you, we think is comprehensive in scope and readable. And we anticipate that it will become a guiding policy document that focuses on implementation. We've done a couple of other things. We've provided the Planning Commission with where we think our policies insert into theirs. We just gave it to them and they have to figure that out, how they're going to do it. We didn't do that, but we did create a document for them about where we think the climate should be inserted into the comp plan. We have 3 members of our committee have been nominated to be on the advisory committee for the grant that's coming in on the climate element. But I do want to jump the gun and tell you that the big takeaway is that this is a big job and that we think that you should reallocate resources to hire full-time staff to take this on. That we think there needs to be somebody who wakes up every day and says, how can I help Lake Forest Park reduce emissions, sustain its ecosystem, and develop resiliency? You know, somebody who focuses on working with other jurisdictions, programs, and education. And how did we get to this? I just want to say, we did all the things you're supposed to do. We read all the reports. We found the 2007 Climate Action Plan of the City of Lake Forest Park that had been on a shelf. We're pretty committed that this not be on a shelf. We looked at the legacy plan, demographic information. We collaborated with other cities. We engaged the citizen surveys. We went out to as many places as we possibly could, the Green Fair, the Farmers Market, the picnic in the park, the garden tour. We looked at funding sources and where they were and how the city might be able to access them. But we think the critical piece of accessing money is having somebody who writes those grants on staff. This is really where our greenhouse gases in Lake Forest Park come from. And this was done by King County. They did a sort of a survey of each of the jurisdictions to identify where the overall greenhouse gas emissions are. And it's not a surprise that the big green area is transportation. And it's mostly on road, but there is off road, you know, ski-doos and I don't know what else, ski-doos and big machines that don't go on the road. Those are the off-road. And then air transportation. And we didn't count how many flights Lake Forest Park people took. It was allocated to our area. And then the second biggest area is buildings and energy. Puget Sound Energy, and most of that's gas coming into people's homes. And Puget Sound Energy says 75% of people in Lake Forest Park have gas coming into their homes for their stoves, their water heaters, or for heating. That's a stunning number, but they stood by that number. But maybe the climate element will be able to see. But there's a lot, so there's a lot of gas coming in to people's homes. And then the brown area is refrigerants. Those are mostly commercial refrigerants, but also old refrigerators and freezers and some heat pumps, some old heat pumps actually have it. And then there is municipal waste, which continues, solid waste, which continues to be an issue. The good news about solving this problem is we don't have to do everything, but we do need to do our part. And this chart is one that the county uses pretty much all the time. The top line is what happens to the emissions if we don't do anything. The line in the middle is what the counties and the state and the federal government can do if they're doing their part in terms of doing the reductions. And that's from the Climate Commitment Act and from the investments in solar and heat pumps and across the country and in our state. And then the last part is what local governments can do, and local governments and local jurisdictions and individuals. It's sort of, this is a mosaic and we just have to do our piece, but we don't have to do everything. The Climate Action Plan really has, the way we finally ended up devising it was that we'd had goals and areas of action. And our 3 goals, they're just kind of basic stuff. We want to reduce emissions. That's sort of the key. We have to reduce emissions. We want to enhance the ecosystems of Lake Forest Park of Lake Forest Park, the ecosystems, and we want to increase sequestration, carbon sequestration. And then the last thing is that we want to build Lake Forest Park to be a resilient community. Because, you know, if everything was perfect starting right now, we'd still have climate issues that have to be dealt with. So how do we assist our citizens in becoming resilient? So those are our three goals. And then we said there are 5 areas that we think those goals can be manifested in. And those are in transportation, buildings and land use, natural environment, ecosystems and sequestration, consumption and solid waste, and community resiliency and well-being. We did have a 6th category, which was municipal, but we took it out. And we took all the things that were very specifically focused on Lake Forest Park government and reintegrated them into these 5 categories. So there are within those 5 categories, things that we think focus specifically on the municipal government. In addition to those, we also have a vision for the future. And the first one is not on this slide, but what it says is, low to no carbon transportation. So that that's the piece of our vision. The other is that residents live and work in energy efficient buildings, that community protects, conserves, and restores natural resources, that we practice a circular economy, reducing resources and reusing and repurposing materials and composting what's left. And that people and ecosystems are healthy and thriving and can respond and adapt to climate change. So when we say what does Lake Forest Park look like when it's doing its climate business, we say in the end it would look like this. And the way we sort of shaped these was we had these 5 focus areas, and then we had 58 actions. Those are sort of big things. And then we had 91 implementation ideas. We do not mean to suggest that there are only 91 things that you need to do. These are what we could think of right off, sort of easy on. And these are ways of sort of organizing things. I'll just show you one that was closer, and this was the the transportation and mobility strategies and actions. Our first strategy was to accelerate the electric vehicle adoption. And then there we have a numbering system, and then we have actions and implementation ideas. And sort of closer up on one of them is electrify the city. One of the actions would be to electrify the city fleet. And the first implementation idea that we had would be develop a transition plan to increase the number of municipal electric vehicles so that they're 100% by 2035. So that's sort of the structure of this whole document and how you move through it. But again, the key for us is that I just have to say, this was the best committee I've ever been on, but you cannot expect volunteers to do this work. It's just outside of the purview of what volunteers can do. We can help, but there needs to be, again, we say somebody who gets up every morning and thinks about how to solve these problems for us or these issues, how to make us a more resilient community. We think that the city needs somebody who's nimble and responsive to drive the climate response, and that we've collected some job descriptions that are included in here from other jurisdictions to give you a hint about what we think this should be done. We think they do just some of the things we thought this person does is outreach to the public. They apply for grants. They ensure that climate justice is a consideration when we're looking at things. And they collaborate with other cities and agencies. And we did a little testing of some of those things. We tried to do collaboration. And it's hard when the volunteer calls up and asks staff people from other cities if they want to get together. They're like, who are you? I'm just a little old lady working on the project. But we think this implementation, we just want to say the implementation really is 3-pronged. we think that have I said enough that we think it's important to hire a climate manager? But we think the council has a role. The council has a leadership role. To talk and model about climate change, to implement the strategies. A lot of this stuff is going to be hard work. One of the things we had sort of floated around was that for every piece of legislation, perhaps you need a climate note that says, what is the impact of climate on this particular action that the city has taken, to bring those things to the forefront so that they're always in place. We think the climate action manager is, wakes up every morning and asks what they can do to move this issue. But we see that the community has a role, and we think that the Climate Action Committee still has a role. We have a 3-year mandate, and we all got on for 3 years. So we're trying to figure out now what to do. And we brought you a work plan, and in the work plan, we said we wanted to do, we wanted to work with the Planning Commission. We wanted to do outreach to organizations. We wanted to develop some model legislation. And so the kinds of things that the kinds of things we're thinking about doing are like bring your own EV car fare. One of the things I've learned from this is that people who have electric vehicles like to talk about them. So we thought, well, let's put them out here in front on Family Day and have people can sit in their cars and talk about them. We found somebody who has a program for how you do the installation for the charging, and a finance person. So it would be things like that. We've talked about, we have a book club. We're currently reading Home on an Unruly Planet. It's a sort of Home on an Unruly Planet, but we're getting a group together to honor Octavia Butler. She's a Lake Forest Park resident. We got to do something. She wrote the book 20 years ago. It was set in 2024. There's a trail to her house. So the bookstore, the library, and some people from the book club are getting together to see if we can't do something more to raise that issue and have a good time with Octavia Butler in the book. We talked with the Republic and said, I want to do an event called Can I Recycle This? My experience is people, are holding up the cap of something and say, well, this or not this. And then they say, well, why don't you read that brochure? And you think, well, yeah, but it doesn't match what. So they want an event where people bring in their milk carton and say, oh, can I recycle this or not? We're going to hope to continue to do outreach at the farmer's market, the garden tour, Green Fair, those kinds of events. And our plan is to go to local organizations, the Rotaries, the Stewardship Foundation, other organizations, and present this issue to them. But we wanted to make sure we weren't getting out of our lane here. So that's a question we have. If you don't want us to do that, or you think we should hold our horses, you should let us know, because we want to collaborate. And I just want to say that there's one of our members that says to us pretty regularly, there's a real cost to inaction. And Lake Forest Park has a lot to lose if we don't do this. We have an extraordinary canopy. We have an extraordinary opportunity to sequester carbon. If we don't take action, we have a lot to lose. And it's not just our canopy, it's how do we build creatively? How do we make sure that our children can afford to live here? How do we, all of those are climate issues. So when we look to the future, we think those things that we laid out are keystones to moving forward and being a sustainable climate city. So one more picture. Thank you. Oh, gone. Did you see it?
All right, thank you so much, Sarah. Really appreciate that you and your committee's work. And I turn the floor over to my fellow council members. You have any questions for Sarah or the committee? Councilmember Leba?
Thank you so much for the presentation and all the work that your committee has done. It's outstanding, and it really represents the values of Lake Forest Park to have so many people involved in this and how they really care about the environment and what Lake Forest Park means to those people and others around us. You'd mentioned collaboration with adjoining cities, and I understand that some of those cities have their own climate action plan. What do you see from your committee as the opportunities for collaboration with them that can leverage the resources or limitations and resources that sometimes small cities have, that in larger settings with collaboration with our neighboring cities, we can actually do more together than we could individually? So what do you see as some of the opportunities that we could explore with our neighboring cities?
Well, we did a couple of things already as sort of testing to that. We did 3 programs with collaborating with Kenmore, Shoreline, and Lake Forest Park. We did gas stoves, heat pumps, and solar. And those were helpful. You know, we got to know each other. The Kenmore people and the Shoreline people hadn't met, and it was a good program. And then we also did a climate town hall that was the first legislative district, so not Shoreline, but Lake Forest Park, Kenmore, Woodinville, Bothell, and a little bit of Kirkland, all have the same legislative district. And we held a climate town hall. All of those cities participated in the publicity and the outreach. Those are the easy ones. I think 2117 presents an opportunity to do some collaboration. Initiative 2117 presents some opportunities. And we're meeting informally with Kirkland and Kenmore to see what kind of proposals they're bringing to the council for a support of the no position on this. Of course, you could do whatever you wanted, but that would, so those are some of the things. But I think if you have staff that then they could, you know, there could be more opportunities for this, because some of the things are so we're also working with Kenmore and Solarize. Solarize Kenmore includes Lake Forest Park. We're in that same process, so we did some publication. There's a lot of publications that are out that I suspect each city is doing, and if we could make sure those were all in shared publications on rebates, that kind of thing. Well, you know, these people don't want to say anything. Dear that bike lanes and transportation options sort of.
So they don't, you don't have a boundary between shoreline and, you know, also things change, right? You want country. So those kinds of things.
Are there any other questions? Councilmember Goldman?
Yeah, I'll start by saying thank you very much. I was really impressed by how comprehensive this is. And in many ways, I appreciate how it's broken down into goals and actions and implementation ideas. I had a couple of questions for you, but you must have anticipated them because you answered them during your presentation. So I will say when I do read through, I'm seeing 90 implementation ideas, and you're saying there might be more. I do feel a level of choice paralysis in terms of where should the council go first. And I think it's completely reasonable having a climate manager to basically be the person who says, you know, this is the lowest hanging fruit. This is what could be changed administratively, or here's what the council could adopt. So, yeah, I mean, speaking off the cuff, I haven't had a chance to speak with anyone else, but I would hope that as we're entering budget season, that our budget can accommodate at least at the very least like a 50% FTE climate manager. But I'm sure we'll be having those deliberations during budget season. But yeah, thank you so much for your whole committee and all the work that you've been doing.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Deputy Mayor Bodie? No?
No, thank you. I appreciate the presentation very much. I've been following the work of the committee, and it's really pretty impressive. It is just a monumental piece of work. And I'm really excited that the committee is going to continue to help us, especially with community information and education. I do have Councilmember Goldman's same questions, which is I think that we'll need to sort through and figure out some priorities and some low-hanging fruit. I think that's going to be an important next step for us. But thank you very much to you and all the members of the committee.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. All right, any other questions? Okay, well, I wanted to thank you and the committee, just like all the other, our council members up here are thanking you. And one of the things that I really want to point out is this is such an intense homegrown effort. Many cities go out immediately to a consultant and hire somebody to basically start writing the report and doing the community outreach. We didn't hire a consultant until literally the end of the process to polish up the thing. And I thought that was one of the most remarkable things about this process. It was entirely citizen driven, entirely resident driven. And I think we should be proud of ourselves for that. So thank you again very much.
And Councilmember Furutani has been fabulous liaison, so thank you for giving it to us.
I blush. All right, thank you very much. Okay, so moving on then, like to basically hear about our consent calendar. To approve the consent calendar.
I move the consent calendar.
Second.
Great. Is there any discussion on any of the items, which we shouldn't? All right, so all those in favor of the approving the consent calendar, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed or abstaining. Thank you so much. Okay. Moving on, we have actually three pieces of legislation, the first of which is Ordinance 1291, adopting a new chapter 3.95, acceptance of donations in the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code. And I think City Administrator Hill will take us through it.
There, got to get up here a little bit. Thank you, Vice Chair and Council. Good evening. Hey, Peanut Gallery. So this is your second touch on donations tonight. You will remember under RCW 3521-100, this allows cities to take donations of money, property, real property that may benefit the city or be able to be used by the city. Last time we were here, there was a discussion around the limitations that we had placed on this ordinance, that if you had just donated, you couldn't, greater than $10,000, you're prohibited from applying for permits under Title 16 and 18 of the Municipal Code. 16 is your environmental protections and 18 is your land use code. We've put provisions in section 3.95050H, and tonight is to check in with you and see if we captured and allayed your concerns and take any notes back if we need to modify this slightly before it comes back to you for adoption. So Attorney Pratt and I will stand for any questions or possible additional modifications.
Does anybody have any questions about the modifications or about the legislation itself? Councilmember Riddle.
So for sort of urgent building maintenance and repair, those are typically not necessarily considered building permits because it's maintenance and repair. So this wouldn't prevent anybody from doing any urgent work on their home or their property.
That's why we put anything that is emergent that's coming up.
Okay.
So that's environmentally critical areas, canopy preservation. I thought, hang on, let me get down to the actual.
Yeah. So I didn't see anything chapter 18 related.
Yeah, I thought.
And maybe that's not necessary in the sense that if it's repair or maintenance, you don't typically need a permit, but I think at some point you might. So I just want to make sure we're covered
Yeah, it
there.
depends on what you're doing in your home and what level it rises to. I think now with the building code, a modification over 200 square feet requires, but if you're just painting or doing carpet, things like that, you don't need that, but windows, roofs.
Emergency plumbing, things like
Yeah.
that would be exempt.
Maybe Attorney Pratt can help me here. Well, 18 wouldn't cover building code. So
Sorry, yeah.
I think, yeah, it's just land use code. And so that just gets you away from big developer donating money, coming in,
Yeah.
making application to redo your town center and having that issue.
That's
But
the intent. Yeah,
um,
avoid that.
these two were where we saw emergent issues coming up. You've got a hazardous tree, or something critical areas, sliding, things like that. And so we're trying to capture that for you.
If anything else you think of, I think this is the right way to go, is to be restrictive with these emergent issues being allowed.
Any other questions for our city administrator? Councilmember Lebo?
Yeah, I was just thinking of sort of to Councilmember Riddle's point about if you're doing maintenance and other things, or you want to install a heat pump. You are required to get permits for those for mechanical, electrical. Are we really concerned about
But those are under the building code and they're not per chapter 16 or 18.
Okay,
within
very
the
good.
municipal
Thank you.
code. Yep.
Any other questions? Okay, so go ahead,
Maybe
Councilmember
a
Riddle.
clarification for when we see this again is how does the city council grant an exception? Is that require us to do any, public hearing? Is that just us reviewing it and approving it through a resolution? Or I'm just curious, what do you envision?
One thought struck me is that this is really kind of a administrative. But is there an emergency? If yes, grant the exception. So council doesn't usually take on those types of projects. So those are usually administrative. But if you did take it on, I think it would have to be presented to you in some way. I would think the applicant would want to talk to you and explain the emergency, and staff would have reviewed it and explain whether they agree with whether or not it's an emergency, then council would make a decision. I would think in the form of a resolution.
Okay, so that would put us on the council timeline though, as far as if it's an emergent issue
Yes.
and we may have to wait almost 2 weeks till we're meeting again. So I think it's something for us to think about on councils to, if it's emergent and we're involved, that might be counter to the ability to respond to it in an emergent effort. So something for us to think about.
Yeah, and maybe, this sentence that says city council may grant an exception, maybe it's the administration may grant an exception and report to city council. We've done that in the past.
Yeah, that might be a way of dealing with it
Maybe we bring you that language and the current language and you can pick between the two.
next time.
All right, any other questions?
A question.
Oh, sorry, Councilmember Good, go ahead.
Where does the money go? What does it go into the general fund? Or if there's a donation?
Well, it would
is-
go into the general fund, but there would
There's a
be a
line
line
item?
in there to hold that and account for that separately.
Okay,
And then council would choose how, it may come with stipulations of how it is to be spent. It may come free. And then you can choose how to spend that, but that is a council decision. You make all decisions on how money is spent.
should there be something in here if there are stipulations on the money?
I believe there already
there-
is something in the
didn't
language
read
about
the whole thing.
stipulations.
Okay. Thanks.
Councilmember Goldman.
Yeah, thanks. I'll echo what Councilmember Riddle was saying, that I think this strikes me as a good compromise. I think in my mind, the idea is that someone who donates a large sum of money shouldn't be able to apply for most of these types of permits. But if they do have a legitimate emergency, yeah, there shouldn't be anything preventing them from doing emergency maintenance. And I also think that, the council is not really the right body to decide if it's an emergency or not. So I'd be okay with what you said, that basically having city staff decide, okay, this is an emergency involving a critical area, and then just reporting back to us to say, this was a donor, and then we did approve their emergency permit, and here was our reasoning, just so that it's public information as to what had transpired. But I don't think the council should hold it up waiting 2 weeks for our next meeting.
And even just as an example, with our tree permits, if there is an emergency, we basically ask them to come in and apply for the permit after the work has been done, so that we aren't holding them up, it's gonna fall on somebody's house or, injure somebody.
Right. Anyone else? Okay, so I think what I heard from the city administrator is that it's going back
It'll
for,
come back
Yeah.
at your next meeting.
okay,
And we'll make that slight modification. But we'll give you both language in case.
All right.
There's
Appreciate it.
concurrence.
thank you. Okay, then I guess we'll move on to ordinances and resolution for action. So don't go anywhere, as they say. Resolution 1953, authorizing the administration to apply for Public Works Board financing for the 40th Place Northeast Roundabout.
Okay, and this is your third touch on this. As you'll remember, the roundabout has had some significant escalating costs. starting with a very way underestimating at the beginning. COVID got in the way, escalating costs, time. Where we stand today is we are at about a $3 million deficit to complete this project. Recently, we were reached out to by Transportation Improvement Board, who has given us the bulk of the money for this project, putting us on notice that we needed a plan to fill the gap and get this project done. We have 1 year to do that. That was a year from basically April to get that completed. Otherwise, there would be consideration moving forward of them pulling back their funds and terminating the project. So as we've talked to the Transportation Improvement Board, they're talking about potentially about another $1 million that they could bring to the table. About half of that is at the discretion of their administrative staff. The rest has to go before their board, leaving us about a $2 million gap. So what I brought to you previously was, the math showing you what that debt service would look like on $2 million. As you remember, it's about just under $218,000 annually. This is for 10 years for $2 million at 1.71% interest, which is their current rate that was just updated this year. And our increased TBD budget based on the work that the council did in the last go around of the budget of the increased car tab fees, as well as the 0.1% sales tax, generates $259,000. So we have, more money than we would have debt service. At the last meeting, there was questions about, should we go out for more? What if we don't get the full amount? And what I can report in talking to our former project manager before he left is he had done a lot of research, and we both found the same thing. $2.5 million is kind of that sweet spot to apply in this program. And we know that about half of that million coming from TIB is questionable. Their staff, when we spoke to them, felt pretty good that they could make the case, but it's ultimately not their decision. So what I've included in here is just calculating it. Annual payments at $2.5 million would be $272,000. That's exceeding your TBD revenues by just over $13,000. And if you enter the full $3 million, that would exceed your TBD revenues by almost $68,000. So I gave that so you would have that to be able to, contemplate $2.5 or $3 million. I guess one thing to think about is there will be some new revenues going into our multimodal transportation based off further previous action you've taken on speed cameras on 178th. So, those deltas in TBD or dollars for road projects, multimodal projects, it might not be as impactful. So Jeff and Katie are on standby with the consultants. They've got all the work done to this point in time to make application. We just need the authorization from council and the dollar amount to proceed with. So stand for any questions.
Does anybody have any questions? All right, Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you for the due diligence in putting this together and the staff work that goes with it. It's sort of disappointing to be at this point. We read a lot about how large construction projects or even modest construction projects or even your home remodel increases in cost. I would reluctantly vote for this in the sense that some of these things in terms of our ability to manage these projects with cost sometimes need a little more due diligence at the beginning, not at the end when we're trying to find the financing because we have a significant cost increase. One can say that originally that the design of it didn't necessarily capture all of the costs associated necessary to do this, but I can assure you this is not an unusual project. Building roundabouts are something that many municipalities and states do. And I think that, and I expressed this earlier to our consultant when this arose, there was a certain amount of, let's not really think through what we need to do and we just sort of proceed on and see what happens. These kinds of projects oftentimes can lead us astray when we haven't really done the necessary homework to understand what are the values and costs associated with these projects. So I would encourage that staff, as they always try to do, really look to our consultants and say, I know this is not the first roundabout you've done. Is this a realistic cost? I know you think you can do it in 80 feet diameter, but haven't the last one you've done been 120 to 130 feet? And just look around. So it's a sort of cautionary note as we go through. And the city has gained experience, for example, doing the culvert projects to recognize the value of doing that planning early and understanding the costs associated with them, so we're not surprised. But these kinds of projects like the roundabout are not unusual.
Agreed.
So we should take the effort to do it. And I would just plug, for example, right now, I know we're looking at the crossing of SR 522, and I have reservations about that. I think that it would just become an opportunity to enrich our consultants, not necessarily to the benefit of our citizens, given the costs that would otherwise be attributable to such a large project.
Great, thank you. Yeah, oh, Councilmember Saunders. Yeah, oh. Okay. All right, well, thank you, thank you, City Administrator Hill. And I just had a similar kind of concern that Councilmember Lebo just voiced, which is, we're going to go out for this loan. I see two scenarios, one where the costs keep escalating beyond the escalator that we put on there, in which case, what would happen with the project?
So the one thing that I included in here, and I'm not going to search for it. If the bids came back higher, TIB has a reserve fund where they can give us an additional $500,000, but that is on the construction side of this, not the design. I think we're far enough down the design, that's not going to change again if it does. Yeah, anyway, we'll go there right now. But if the construction came in higher, they have about $500,000. Yeah, I would hate to see that our consultants blow the engineer's estimate so significantly that the project is undoable, because we would owe some money back to some people, specifically WashDOT, and then we'd be on the naughty list with TIB in the future if we didn't finish this project out.
So just pursuing that line of inquiry a little bit, if that we needed to tap into that, would the city come back to the council to get approval?
Yeah, I think they have the authority within them to grant us the additional 500,000. Obviously, it comes back because you have to accept those dollars, but yes, we would come back to council for that.
Okay. And the other somewhat much more unlikely scenario, suppose that we put this out to bid and it comes out significantly, the bids come in significantly lower, then we don't have to use this then, right? Or we can use a lower amount?
Yeah, I would think we could use a lower amount. I believe it's a reimbursement type of a scenario, so.
Okay. Great, thank you.
And we can also prepay it, give them a lump sum back and be done.
All right, council, this is the third touch on this, and I think there are no other comments, right? Okay, yeah, this is the third touch on this, so what's your pleasure, as the mayor would say?
I would like to move resolution 24-1953, authorizing the administration to apply for Public Works Board financing for the 40th Place roundabout.
Can you include the dollar amount in that?
Oh, yes,
Thank you.
roughly $2 million.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Second.
All right, there's been a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on this resolution? All right, not seeing any, I guess we'll call the question. All those in favor of resolution 24-1953, authorizing the administration to apply for Public Works Board financing for the 40th Place Northeast Roundabout in the amount of $2 million, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you.
That we will be in touch with TIB to put them on notice, and we will get the application made for the Public Works Board loan, and we will report to you as it moves forward and let you know.
Thank you so much. And I guess we have one more, the ordinance 24-1293, amending chapter 10.06, traffic safety cameras of the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code related to fines for traffic safety camera infractions.
Thank you. House Bill 2384, as you remember, passed both houses and becomes effective as law on June 6th of this year. It made a couple of changes in the fine structure for traffic cameras. One, setting the base fee at $145. Ours currently is $136. and then allowing the council to make it, the city, and then adoption by the council to set fines within school speed zones anywhere up to double of the $145, so $290. This is what the mayor presented to you at your committee of the whole meeting on April 22nd of this year. Couple other things that was covered in that and is reflected here in the draft ordinance is that so the $290 from what the mayor presented and what's in this draft ordinance applies to recidivism of speeding within the school zones, and that's more than once. And then 11 miles an hour or more over the posted speed limit, which is 20. So that is a 31 mile an hour or more. I know there's some questions at the Budget and Finance Committee meeting about kind of where things sit right now. In a 20 mile an hour zone, you are ticketed if you're going 26. In a 25 mile an hour zone for the speed cameras, it would be at 31. And don't confuse that 31 with the 31 for the traffic cameras within the school zone. As far as fiscal policy implications, there will be a $9 increase per citation just on the base fee. But as Director Vaughn reported to you, we don't know exactly what these dollars mean because there are provisions in there for individuals to have portions of the fine waived or sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. You know what I mean? I want to say it for the record. Indigent individuals, those that apply for that, as well as the judge does have the authority to look at the situation and can reduce the fee. So I stand for questions on this one as well.
All right. Council, do you have any questions for the city administrator? Okay, nobody online. Okay. All right, then again, what shall we do with this piece of legislation? This is again the third touch.
I'd like to move ordinance 24-1293, amending chapter 10.06 traffic safety cameras of the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code related to fines for traffic safety camera infractions.
Second.
All right, that's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All right, I'll just mention something. I'm very much in favor of this because the fact is that we're going to see increased traffic volumes as the Link Light Rail stations open. And my concern is once September rolls around and the kids start coming back to school, especially along Brookside, that there will be significant potential interactions between traffic and the walking school children. And I think by giving ourselves this lead time of a few months to get people used to having these cameras there, it's a really good idea. After all, I know that this is going to be revenue generating for the city, but that's not the principal reason, remember, that we're doing this. We're doing this because we are very concerned about pedestrian and multimodal safety. So I think this is a great step in that direction.
And if I could, just to your point about the warning period, and this is for the new cameras, but just so you know, that I think you probably saw the news flashes went out today about the cameras are going into warning mode on June 3rd. We will also have reader board signs along 178 at either extent of that speed zone, and then they will go into effect and start issuing citations around July 4th. Maybe we'll wait till the 5th, let everybody have a holiday, but.
Okay, so I also wanted to compliment the city staff on the cooperation between Public Works and the police department and the court. I mean, this is amazing that all this kind of came together in a fairly short period of time and that we're able to move on it today. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so call the question. All those in favor of ordinance 24-1293, amending chapter 10.06, traffic safety cameras of the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code related to fines for traffic safety camera infractions, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you, council. All right, so moving on. Are there any other items for council discussion or action? Okay. Any other business? I think we can do that.
We can do that now.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to excuse Mayor French and Deputy Mayor Bodie,
She's on.
Oh.
Just Mayor French.
just Mayor French.
Need a second.
I'll second.
Okay, so the motion is to excuse Mayor French from this meeting. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
All right, thank you very much, council. Okay. All right, finally, council member reports, sorry, council committee reports. Are there any council committee reports?
Just that we
Yep.
met earlier, the day escapes me now, for the budget committee, and we reviewed the monthly dashboard for April. And we also discussed the traffic fines. So,
Thank you. Are there any other council committee reports? All right, we'll move on to council member reports then. Anybody have something they want to report? Okay. All right, seeing no comments at the moment, I will I will make my comment about RIA 8. That's the Water Resources Inventory Area 8 meeting that I was able to attend, the Salmon Recovery Council. And the one item that struck me there was it was our giving out the grants meeting, and there were literally millions of dollars of grants that we gave out. And the one that struck me the most, and I wanted to congratulate our municipality to our east, our eastern neighbor, Kenmore. They received $1.4 million total for developing their Lake Point acquisition. So it was $1 million from the cooperative. Sorry, $1 million from the Salmon Recovery Fund Board for the actual acquisition of that property. And for those of you who don't know where that is, it's the gravel pit. And $400,000 was approved by the Cooperative Watershed Management Group. And that's for the design and planning for the actual what's going to become of that area. So congratulations to them. The reason that I mention it here is because this is certainly funding that could be available to this city to do things with, of course, our lakefront areas as well. So thanks. Okay. Let's see. I don't think there's a mayor's report. Okay. All right. And City Administrator Hill, do you have anything to add to your report? Okay. Well, this was efficient. All right. Oh, sorry. Councilmember Riddle, go ahead.
For the police department portion of the city administrator, I just want to thank the police for allowing folks to sit at Horizon View and watch the aurora. I was one of those. I was really glad that we were able to accommodate that. And it was a beautiful night to be out. And I just want to appreciate your flexibility in allowing the community to experience that in one of our parks.
And as an astronomy instructor, I very much appreciate your comment, Councilmember Riddle. One time you can get the people interested in the sky. That's awesome. All right. So any other last minute comments? Good of the order? All right. Well, I guess then the city council meeting is adjourned. Yeah.